The winter wind sang like a ghost across the valley, its voice caught in the barbed wire fences and the black bones of the cottonwoods. Snow stretched unbroken to the far hills, where the sky bruised purple before nightfall. Inside a small cabin near the edge of that white silence, a baby's cry rose and fell, thin, desperate, relentless, as if the cold itself had found a tongue. Elias Wren stood near the stove, rocking the infant against his chest with hands that no longer felt alive. The kettle hissed, but the milk had already cooled. It didn't matter. The baby refused it again, her tiny mouth trembling before another cry shivered through the room. His eyes, rimmed red and hollow from sleepless nights, drifted toward the bed where a small cross of willow branches rested against the wall. His wife's shawl, still smelling faintly of lavender, lay folded beside it. He had buried Lila 2 weeks ago beneath a drift so deep he'd had to carve a path through it twice just to reach her grave. The ground had been too hard to dig alone, so Sheriff Tate had sent 2 men to help. They'd said little, their breath clouding between them as the shovel hit frozen earth. "A shame," one had murmured. "Poor fella. Lost his woman same day he gained a child." The words followed Elias like a curse. Now, as the cabin filled with the dull glow of dying firelight, the baby's cries swelled again. He whispered her name, Clara, though it felt strange on his tongue. A name his wife had chosen and never spoken aloud. The walls seemed to close in with every sound she made. Desperation itched under his skin. He'd tried goat's milk, cow's milk, even sugared water, but nothing eased her hunger. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the snow. The air stung his face. Across the field, the barn slumped like an old man, the fence half buried, the horses silent. The horizon had turned to smoke-colored dusk. He pressed his forehead against the cold wood of the doorframe, his breath catching. "What do I do, Lila?" he whispered to the night. "What do I do now?" The wind answered with a low moan that carried through the pines. In town, they said grief drove a man mad faster than whiskey. Elias felt both the truth and mercy of that. By morning, Clara's cries were hoarse and weak. He strapped her against his chest, bundled in a wool blanket, and saddled the mare. Frost glazed the reins and the saddle creaked under his weight. The ride into town was long, each hoofbeat echoing like the tick of a clock counting down his failures. The general store's bell clanged as he entered, drawing every eye his way. Conversation dimmed, replaced by the sharp scent of gossip in the air. Mrs. Avery, the preacher's wife, stared at the baby and muttered something behind her gloved hand. Sheriff Tate leaned on the counter, boots crossed at the ankles, and gave a slow nod. "Elias," he said, "didn't expect to see you out." "I need milk that'll take," Elias said, voice low. "She won't drink." "She's fading," Tate frowned. "Ain't much more to try. Maybe—" His eyes flicked toward the far end of the store, where a woman in a gray shawl was counting coins into her palm. "Maybe Mara Ellery'd know what to do. She's nursed sick babes before." Mrs. Avery turned sharply. "Her? Lord help you, Elias Wren. That woman's a shadow. Lost a family under her care, they say. You'd best not invite more sorrow." Mara looked up then, meeting their eyes with quiet stillness. Her face was pale, framed by loose strands of dark hair, eyes the color of river silt after rain. She gathered her basket and left without a word, the bell chiming softly as the door closed behind her. Elias hesitated, jaw tight. "Where does she live now?" he asked. "Down by the creek," Tate said. "Cabin near the willow grove. But I'd think twice if I were you. Folks don't take kindly to her company." He didn't answer. The cold bit deep as he rode out again, following the trail that wound past the church and through the pines. Snow had begun to fall, soft and soundless. By the time he saw smoke rising through the trees, the baby's cries had thinned to small whimpers that tore at his chest. Her cabin stood crooked but warm-looking, a small lamp flickering in the window. He dismounted and knocked once, then again harder. The door opened a crack. Mara stood there, eyes cautious beneath the shadow of her shawl. "Mrs. Ellery," he said, removing his hat. My baby won't feed. I don't know what else to do." Her gaze moved to the bundle against his chest, then back to his face. "Come in," she said quietly. The heat of the fire hit him first, dry and clean, smelling faintly of sage. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of herbs and dried flowers. She motioned to the chair near the hearth. Elias hesitated before sitting, feeling out of place amid the scent of warmth and womanhood. Mara knelt beside the fire, warming a pot of milk. The baby stirred weakly, mouth opening but refusing again. Her small fists waved in the air like fragile wings. Mara's brow furrowed. "She's hungry," she murmured. "But she doesn't know this kind of milk." Elias stared at the flames. "She's all I've got left," he said, voice breaking. and I can't give her what she needs." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she took a slow breath, drawing the baby gently into her arms. Without words, she sat by the fire, unfastened her shawl, and cradled Clara close. The baby latched and began to feed, the sound soft and rhythmic. The first peaceful sound Elias had heard in days. He turned his head away, throat tightening, a mixture of gratitude and shame twisting inside him. He'd buried a wife, and now another woman nursed his child. The flicker of the fire painted gold across the floorboards, the silence broken only by the wind's sigh and the baby's soft breaths. When Mara finally looked up, her expression was unreadable, tender but distant, as if guarding herself from whatever kindness might follow. "She'll be all right for now," she said, "but you'll need to keep her warm. Her strength's still thin." Elias nodded, unable to find the right words. He rose and placed his hat back on, the brim hiding his eyes. "I'll bring something in return," he managed. "Feed, wood, whatever you need." Her mouth curved faintly, the smallest hint of a smile. "I need nothing, Mr. Wren. Only that you take care of her." He left without another word, snow already drifting thick in the air. Behind him, the light from her cabin glowed like a lantern in the storm. By the next morning, the town's whispers had found their way into every corner. At the blacksmith's, someone said the widow Ellery had taken the widower's baby to her breast. At the church, Mrs. Avery shook her head, claiming such indecency would bring more misfortune. Elias heard it all when he rode in for supplies, each murmur pressed against his chest like a stone. He didn't respond, but that night, he loaded a sack with chopped wood and a few apples from the cellar, the last of his harvest. He carried them through the dark and left them by Mara's porch, the snow crunching under his boots. From the window, her shadow moved, pausing as if she'd sensed him there. He didn't stay long enough to see her open the door. In the days that followed, Clara grew stronger. Her cries softened into coos that filled the cabin like sunlight breaking through frost. Yet Elias felt an ache that wouldn't leave him, a strange pull toward that quiet cabin by the creek. He'd see the smoke of her chimney on his morning rides and think of her voice, low and calm like a prayer. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the snow, he saw her walking the ridge, basket in hand, gathering herbs despite the cold. She waved once, a small, hesitant motion, and he lifted his hand in return. It was the first time in months he'd remembered what it felt like to be seen without pity. That night, as he rocked Clara to sleep, the firelight danced across her face. Outside, the wind had softened. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried, lonely but alive. Elias whispered into the dark, "We're all right now, little one." And though the winter still held its grip, he could feel something shifting beneath the cold. Not quite spring, not yet, but the promise of it. Something that began the moment a stranger opened her door. The thaw came late that year, reluctant as a wounded animal. Snow lingered in the hollows and along the creek bed, where ice cracked like breaking glass under the weight of the sun. Each morning, Elias woke to the sound of melting, drips from the eaves, trickles down the walls. A quiet reminder that even winter's grief could not last forever. Clara was stronger now. Her cheeks had filled, and her eyes followed the slow sway of the lantern light with a kind of sleepy wonder. She gurgled when he spoke, grasped his finger in her small fist. Each sound she made softened something in him he'd thought buried with Lila. Yet her health came not from his hands alone, and he knew it. Every few days, Mara rode out through the half-melted fields, wrapped in her gray shawl, bringing herbs or a jar of milk. She never stayed long. Sometimes they spoke of the baby, how much she slept, how she laughed in her dreams, and sometimes they said nothing at all. Words weren't necessary. The quiet between them had grown companionable. One afternoon she found him repairing the barn roof, the wind cutting sharp and clean across the valley. "You've been working too hard," she said, shielding her eyes from the glare. He looked down, smiling faintly. "Hard work's easier than the kind that happens inside a man's head." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment. Not pity, but recognition. "Inside's where the snow melts last," she said softly. When she turned to leave, he called after her. "Wait, you'll take supper?" She hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the fire glowed and the stew simmered slow. Clara slept in her cradle beside the hearth. They ate in near silence, the rhythm of spoons and fire filling the space between them. Outside, a storm brewed, gray clouds swallowing the hills. When thunder rolled, she flinched slightly, then smiled at her own fear. Never liked storms, she admitted. They remind me how small I am. They remind me how much I still have to lose, he said. The words slipped out before he could stop them. She looked at him, eyes shining in the lamplight. Then you've still got something worth keeping, she murmured. That night, she stayed as the wind rose. The snow came hard and fast again, a last desperate flurry of winter refusing to die. By morning, the world was white once more, and the door was buried to its hinge. Clara had taken a fever in the night. Her breath came fast, her skin too hot beneath Elias's hand. Panic clawed at him, the same helplessness he'd felt when Lila faded in his arms. He whispered prayers he didn't believe in, begging the child to hold on. Mara was already moving, grinding herbs, boiling water, her face pale with focus. She's strong, she said, though her voice trembled. We'll break it. Through. The night they worked, trading silence for the sound of the storm and the child's faint moans. Elias fed the fire, watching it reflect in Mara's eyes, twin embers of determination and fear. When Clara's breathing steadied near dawn, Mara finally sank into the chair, exhaustion softening her posture. He knelt beside her, his hand finding hers almost by accident. You saved her, he whispered. She saved herself, Mara replied, though her fingers tightened around his. I only stood beside her. The snow outside began to lighten with morning. He helped her to bed, insisting she rest. Her lashes fluttered once before closing, her body trembling from fatigue. Elias covered her with his wife's quilt, a quiet offering, a bridge between what was lost and what still remained. When she woke hours later, the storm had passed. Light poured through the cracks in the shutters, turning the cabin golden. She sat up slowly, confusion flickering in her gaze until she saw him by the stove, cradling Clara and humming a broken tune. You're better with her than you think, she said. He turned, smiling, a small, tired smile that carried warmth. I had a good teacher. For a long while they simply looked at one another, the silence between them thick with everything unspoken. The air felt fragile, as if one breath too deep might break whatever fragile peace had settled. But peace in towns like theirs never lasted long. By the next week, the thaw was complete. Mud replaced snow, and the roads filled with riders again. News traveled fast, too fast. Rumors crawled from porch to porch, gathering weight like stones rolling downhill. Some said the widow Ellery had taken up with the rancher. Others whispered she'd bewitched him, fed his child like her own. Sheriff Tate arrived one gray afternoon, his horse lathered from the climb. Elias was mending a fence when the sheriff called out. Need a word. Elias wiped his hands on his coat. If it's about supplies, I'll settle my account next week. It ain't about supplies, Tate said, jaw tight. You've stirred talk, Elias. Men say you've got that woman living under your roof. You know how it looks. He felt the familiar anger rise, slow, steady, cold. It looks like kindness, he said. Something we've near forgotten around here. Tate sighed, shifting in the saddle. You're a good man. Don't ruin yourself on her account. Some things don't wash off easy. Elias looked toward the cabin, where smoke curled softly from the chimney. Maybe it's time we stop treating Mercy like it's a stain. Tate's expression hardened. Suit yourself, he muttered, turning the horse toward town. But the eyes of this place are on you both. That evening, Elias found Mara on the porch, holding Clara against her shoulder. He told her what Tate had said. She listened, eyes unreadable. I warned you, she said quietly. A woman like me only brings trouble. A man like me already lives in it, he answered. She smiled faintly, but sorrow hung behind it. You don't owe me your defense, Elias. Then let me give it anyway. Days later, the reckoning came. Tate rode up again, this time with two men at his side, Deacon Avery and young Silas Boone, both faces set like stone. The baby's cries could be heard from inside as the men dismounted. We're here to see she leaves, the deacon said. This town's had enough sin paraded in daylight. Mara stood in the doorway, Clara in her arms. Her face was calm, but her hands shook. Elias stepped out before her, the sun catching the frost still clinging to his coat. She leaves when I say she leaves, he said evenly. This ain't your choice alone, Tate said. Then make it mine. Elias replied, his voice hardening. This woman saved my child when no one else would lift a hand. You want to throw her out? You'll have to walk over me first. The wind fell silent. Even the horses stilled. The men exchanged glances, uncertain now. Tate's eyes narrowed, searching Elias's face. You sure this is what you want? He asked quietly. Elias nodded once. It's what's right. Tate exhaled, shoulders dropping. Then let it be. He turned his horse, motioning for the others to follow. You'll find no peace here, he warned. But maybe that's not what you're after. As they rode off, the sound of hooves faded into the distance. Elias turned back to Mara. She was crying quietly, though her smile trembled like the first thaw of spring. You didn't have to. I did, he interrupted. For once in my life I did. The sky opened above them, a pale blue stretching endless and clean. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, of something beginning again. In the weeks that followed, the town's gossip burned itself out. Folks grew tired of cruelty when the fields called them to work. Elias rebuilt the barn, plank by plank, and Mara planted herbs along the fence, sage, mint, lavender. Each evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, her lamp glowed in his window like a steady promise. They never spoke of love, not directly. It lived in the small things, the way he poured her coffee first, the way she brushed snow from his coat before stepping inside, the sound of Clara's laughter spilling between them like music. Theirs was not a loud happiness, but it was enough. Years later, when the valley had long since forgotten the scandal and remembered only the harvests, old Jonah Hale would tell the story again to anyone who'd listen. He'd lean back in his chair by the stove, smoke curling from his pipe, and say, they never married those two, but you'd see her light burning in his window every night till the day he died. And if that ain't love, then maybe we've all been measuring wrong. He'd pause then, eyes distant, voice softening. Some folks talk about salvation like it's thunder from heaven, but sometimes it's quieter. A woman opening her door, a man finding his courage, a baby's cry turning to laughter. The fire would crackle, and the listeners would sit a little straighter, warmed by something they couldn't quite name. And Jonah, smiling faintly through the smoke, would end the tale the same way every time. If you found a bit of warmth in that story, friend, don't let it fade. There's more where that came from. Subscribe for the next tale, and carry this one with you till the next cold night.